read quite a lot about the Chinese. I've studied them. I've spoken to senior leaders. I've spoken to people who think about China. I'm not an expert, but I have a decent understanding. Okay? So bear that in mind. Now, the way the Americans value individual liberty, the Chinese value harmony. They are not, individual liberty is not central to their idea. Okay? Their idea is much more about the society being in harmony, because they've had massive tremors, right? They've had huge amounts of pain. They've had revolution. They've had civil war. They've had the Cultural Revolution. So what they don't want is that things go out of control, that things spiral out of control and disorder comes, which is legitimate. It's, for them, it's as legitimate as individual liberty is for the United States, right? For them. One conversation that I had really struck me about China, and it's shaped how I think about it. Okay, and the conversation was with a senior gentleman of the Communist Party, and I asked him. I said, "Tell me, what is China?" Right? I said, "Is China a country?" He says, "Yes." And I said, "Okay, is China a nation?" And he said, "Yes." I said, "No, but give me a Chinese explanation of what you are." And so he says, "Look, Mr. Gandhi, I'll explain it to you." He says the Yellow River comes down from the Himalayas. It flows down. And it has unlimited power. It has unlimited energy in it. He says if Chinese civilization orders itself and organizes itself effectively, which it does on the coast, mostly, it can harness the power of the Yellow River. And when it harnesses the power of the Yellow River effectively, China rises. He says sometimes what happens is the Yellow River comes with all its energy, and China cannot organize itself to harness its energy. And then there is disorder in China. And the energy havoc in, and then flows into the sea and is wasted. And I thought this was a completely different way of thinking about a country than anything I had heard from any Western politician. I had never heard anything of this type, right? If you ask American politicians what is America, it's land of the free, right? They don't start talking to you about the Mississippi River and that's. I never heard it. Maybe they do. Okay, but so China looks at energy. China looks at flow. China looks at processes, right? And China tries to shape them. Now, if you use that metaphor, you can see some of their actions flowing out of this. Right? You can understand now what the Belt and Road looks like and why it does what it does. Because Chinese, the Yellow River, the Yellow River flows this way. Chinese civilization harnesses the energy, and then the energy flows right back into Asia. Right? You can understand what the Three Gorges Dam is. Right? And I get the sense, and maybe I'm wrong, but I get the sense that the infrastructure that you see in China, the railways, the airports, the dams, they are actually, in the Chinese mind, they are emerging from nature. They're emerging from the power of the river, and they're, in a sense, China sees itself as a force of nature, right? And is embedded in nature. Whereas the West, America, does not see itself as embedded in nature. It sees itself as placed on top of nature. Okay? Now this completely changes how you think about things. And this explains, to me at least, why the Chinese would be so interested in harmony. And why and how they would think about it. There's another conversation that for me was absolutely fascinating. And I started, when I get into conversations, I tend to pester people, ask them silly questions and stuff. So I started asking this other gentleman about IP, right? And I said, look, what do you think about IP? And he's like, no, we completely agree with IP, and IP makes sense. Intellectual property is fundamental. And I asked him a couple of times. And then he made two very interesting observations. So he says to me, in the middle of the conversation, he says, Mr. Gandhi, people don't invent things. Things emerge. Right? Completely different viewpoint. In the United States, Steve Jobs invents something. In China, things emerge. Meaning processes happen, and then out of those processes, things come out. And he says, why should somebody who is, anyway, he says, even if things are invented, why should someone who has invented something have perpetual rights on it? So what if he's invented it? Why should he have a monopoly on the benefits of that thing? To me, this was quite a profound statement. And I said to him, look, the logic is that you give him the right to give him an incentive so that he invents again, right? I said, how do you think about incentives? He says, oh, very simple. The person who runs fastest wins, right? We don't really care if he invented it. If he can run fast enough and other people can't catch up with him, that's good enough incentive for him, right? So here you see two completely different ideas. One, that they're a force of nature, and two, powerful ideas, as powerful as American ideas for them, right? And two, that people are not actually inventing things, processes, energy, things are emerging from processes and energy. Okay? And this makes their worldview completely different. One last thing. The organizing principle of the United States, and something that you're very, very intimately associated with, is the corporation. Your lives will all be about corporation, or most of them will be about corporations and sales and marketing and elements of a corporation. And that's how America organizes itself. And I think embedded in this is the central innovation of the Chinese. Pre-collapse of the Soviet Union, there were two organizational systems on the planet, broadly. There was the American system, Western system with the corporation, and there was the Soviet system, and in those days the Chinese system with the state. State did what the corporation does. And post the collapse of the Soviet Union, can we go ahead? Is that no, I think they removed that quote. Post the collapse of the Soviet Union, the Chinese did something very innovative. And if you've heard the quote, you might have heard a quote by Deng Xiaoping saying that it doesn't matter the color of the cat as long as it can catch the mouse. Have you heard that quote? Yeah. So I think what he was saying in that quote was that actually we will organize ourselves using the corporation, just like the West, right? But we will do one further thing. Inside the corporation, we will embed the Communist Party. So it's a hybrid. It is exactly like the United States as far as the corporation is concerned, and then it's got a magic trick in it, which is that inside the corporation is what they call the instrument of the people, what we call the Communist Party of China, right? And this does something fundamental. What it does is it allows the Communist Party of China to have a full monopoly on information in the country. which the government of the United States doesn't have, or the government of India doesn't have, or the government of most other countries doesn't have, because there's a separation between the state and the corporation. And this gives them a huge advantage in artificial intelligence. It gives them a huge advantage in all sorts of, in cyber warfare, etc., etc. I'm just placing that on the table.